Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today with reviewing the reviews of The Last of Us Part 2. After a weekend full of passion projects like our Future of Persona video, which is the biggest project I've dropped in this channel's history, please do check it out. I wanted to shift my focus to more current news, focus on RPGs once again, so I thank you guys for supporting those passion projects, and now we're going to move forward business as usual for a little bit. Now, while I was doing those passion projects, I was waiting to see if I was going to get a review code for The Last of Us Part 2 before publishing this video, because I knew there was a chance that I did, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. So, like you guys, when I don't get a copy for a game, I go out and see what the reviews are if I'm interested, and especially because The Last of Us Part 2 encountered quite a bit of controversy, especially with story spoilers. Things have been up in the air, and now that there's been an overwhelmingly positive reception to the game, some people are confused. So the idea of reviewing the reviews is not to tear down other people's work, to critique them endlessly, but rather to take parts of each individual reviews that are out there that line up, highlight them, discuss them, as well as some flaws that individual reviewers are mentioning as well. And it gives you, the consumer, as well as myself, better information on what to expect going into launch day and to know if we even want to pick this game up. I will say the tone for The Last of Us Part 2's discussion has completely changed. It's a lot more positive now. This really shifted when Jim Ryan of PlayStation made a very interesting comment stating the following, that this game has tallied more pre-orders in Europe than Marvel's Spider-Man did at the same point before its launch, and Spider-Man sold a ton of copies. Now, obviously, Spider-Man, more recognizable, you can sell it to kids, there's a lot of give there, but The Last of Us Part 2 is going to make PlayStation a ton of money. That's no doubter there, and it seems like they're very confident the story spoiler leak has not impacted their bottom line, and perhaps, if anything, has only helped it. Now, before we do get into all of these reviews, one thing worth noting is an editor's note before GameSpot's review that every single other review has something similar to this, but I thought GameSpot's was the most comprehensive. It says, due to embargo restrictions around spoilers, parts of this review are intentionally vague. We've done our best to explain certain parts of the game and our critique without discussing any story spoilers. However, if you want to understand the full context of some of our analysis here, we'll have another review up when The Last of Us Part 2 is officially out that discusses the story in greater detail and further explains our thoughts. This review will have the same score and will serve as a deeper, more detailed analysis for those who want to read more. Now, when I saw this, I kind of took it as a bit of a red flag. I've done a ton of game reviews. You guys can check my Buy, Rent, or Pass playlist. I've done well over 100 reviews, and I know for a fact I've been under some heavy embargoes before. This one, to me, seems incredibly strict. And what a lot of these reviews have stated is that the second half of the game was completely walled off from any discussion, from gameplay to story. You could not talk about it. So what happens is you have these reviewers doing a careful dance saying, I really like this thing, or I don't really like this, or it took a while to heat up, and they can't really explain why. So what's happening is a lot of questions are now being thrown in the reviewer's face, and so it is so strict that GameSpot is going to produce a separate review on launch day going into more detail. If that doesn't highlight how strict things are for reviewers to discuss things, then I don't know what to tell you. And unless you are a diehard The Last of Us fan, just be aware of this, man, because you might be going in blind to something that you may not end up enjoying. Or you might be on the other end and you'll hear this and go, oh, I'm going to pick this up now. This sounds cool. So keep that type of stuff in mind. So for the reviews themselves, we have GameSpot giving The Last of Us Part 2 an 8 out of 10, Game Informer with a 10 out of 10, IGN 10 out of 10, GamesRadar 5 out of 5, US Gamer 4.5 out of 5, and Destructoid was an 8.5 out of 10. So pretty overwhelmingly positive reviews here, high scores across the board, and the outliers being 8s, which some games are lucky to get reviewed as an 8, which is still a good score, but it does highlight there's some issues that may hit or miss people. Now, one thing consistently highlighted in each of these reviews, we're going to start off with IGN, is violence. This seems to be a very violent game. I was looking for direct examples. Once again, because of embargo restrictions, they seemed vague on those details. but we're going to go ahead and get a picture in our head as to how brutal this game is. And yes, despite all the added nuance, Part 2 has some of the most bluntly brutal combat animations I've seen in any game, and it's never played to a cartoonish degree the way something like Mortal Kombat does. It fits thematically with the tone, Ellie's revenge-minded focus, and the violence those in power will use to control this post-pandemic society, but that doesn't make the impact any less gruesome and occasionally hard to stomach. Furthermore, when we read from Game Informer's review, it depicts the raw violence that Ellie uses to navigate this harsh world, and that violence feeds into pivotal plot points during her quest for revenge. Yes, you kill many humans and infected along the way, but the accumulated effect of Ellie's fury weighs on you over time. Even as you clear an area of hostile guards, you question your own role in the brutality. The people you assassinate have names, and you can overhear them talking about their loved ones as you sneak up on them. Though it's difficult to say this is, quote, fun, end quote, The Last of Us Part 2 forges this level of investment and immersion in one of its greatest strengths. So these were sort of the main examples I saw that painted a picture of why The Last of Us Part 2 is brutal. A blending of emotion with very violent and borderline, I guess, realistic animations on how you kill your foes. Now, when it came to hearing enemy chatter while sneaking up on them to make the player feel something while they take their life from them, I've seen that a million times before. So that's one thing I noticed is as I read about the violence in this game, I was like, okay, we're going to see some very brutal animations. I have no doubt they're going to push the limits there. You know, there was that one trailer that came out a really long while ago when The Last of Us Part 2 was first revealed, and it was someone getting hit in like all their joints with a hammer. It's like, yeah, that's the type of violence you can kind of feel in your hands. You're like, whoa, that's a lot. But it's not something that we really haven't seen in games before. So for me personally, I see them pushing the limit as a mature rated game. As I've read here, it's going to be insanely violent. It's just a matter of how much can you tolerate. I think if you go in knowing that The Last of Us is a very dark universe, maybe it makes some of that violence a little easier to swallow. Now, I thought GamesRadar's review was really good, and the opening to it stuck out to me most because I just played a game that left me with a similar type of feeling. So let's read. The Last of Us Part 2 has consumed me. It's the last thing I've been thinking about as I've gone to bed, and the first thing that enters my head when I wake up. I've relived entire sequences in my mind, marveling at their exquisite design and wondering what I could have done differently. Its many, many unforgettable cutscenes are burned into my brain as though they're real memories, so evocative in their fierce emotional resonance that they now hold a regular presence in most of my dreams, not to mention my nightmares. Now, I know that's a little extra, I get it, but I do understand when I beat Persona 5 Royal, I'm sorry, I know I talk about Persona a lot lately, but once I did complete that game, I was left with that emotion of thinking about it before I went to bed, waking up, thinking about it, the music playing in my head, the experience sits with you. This was the first quote that got me excited. I love having a game that sits with me and makes me think and moves me. When it moves me, it jars my emotions. That's when I know a creation is truly good because it's disrupted my daily life. I can't just go, gaming, separate from everything. It's like, no, you're now directly in my head. And I don't know, I just like that. So I thought this little write-up here was exciting, especially because The Last of Us 1 had a cutscene at the end of Act 1. I won't spoil what happens, but there is a moment that just, it instantly rises and it ends and it cuts to black. And that's that moment that's been burnt in my head. So I think of that with The Last of Us Part 1. And if The Last of Us Part 2 is going to provide moments like that, you know, I'm all on board for that. That was what I loved so much about the original game. They also mention how the resulting 25-hour campaign is full of controller dropping holy crap moments, as it is the quiet, contemplative scenes of immense poignancy that the studio is known for, many of which are enough to leave a lump in the throat, if not render you a bawling wreck on the couch. Once again, I think for me at least, a bit of an exaggeration, as a contemplation of the thin line between justice and vengeance and an uncomfortable plunge into the darker shades of the human psyche. The Last of Us Part 2 is unforgiving in its depiction of violence, nihilism, did I say that right? Nihilism? Sorry, nihilism, and nebulousness of morality in a world without laws. For me, most important aspect here, 25 hours. This was another thing that really lined up with a lot of reviews. 25 to 28 hours seem to be the range. This is about, I'd say, 14 hours or so longer than The Last of Us 1, which is pretty significant. And given that this story is, as we'll see in a little bit, broken up into 2 parts, the second part completely walled off from the player's knowledge right now, it explains probably the game's length. This is where it gets momentum and truly becomes interesting. US Gamer gives it a 4.5 out of 5. It largely regains its momentum in the final quarter or so, saying that it's stumbled a bit, with a finale that's as intense as anything I've experienced in a video game. When all was said and done, I was left feeling emotionally spent, uncertain whether I ever wanted to play a hypothetical The Last of Us Part 3. Together, The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 tell one complete story. The first being action, the sequel being reaction. It may not be the ending that many fans want, but it feels like this story is finished. It's one I won't soon forget. I don't think I need to say more than that. Okay, I'm sure you guys are aware. And this part really feeds off what we were talking about with US Gamer, so maybe it isn't exactly what we assume. There's no weird esoteric side tangent from an unnamed character to parse. It hits the ground running and tells a cohesive, emotional story with Ellie at the helm. This is explaining its continuation as a story, saying there's no weird side tangent like a convenience, an unnamed character stepping in. I found this to be very telling as well. Generally speaking, The Last of Us Part 2 is brutal. Its story seems to be very moving across the board. Even people who gave it less than a 10 said this story was really heavy, very moving as a player. So that's stuff that you can generally expect. Brutality and a strong story. We'll see how exactly that plays out. One last thing I wanted to highlight that I kind of thought was interesting. This is from GameSpot's review. Most of the time, there aren't any collectibles to find in combat-heavy areas, but there are still notes and things to find when enemies are around. And as a result, I ended up scouring every corner of every area in the hopes of finding something cool. Because most combat arenas give you multiple avenues of attack, which is good level design, and escape, though I ended up backtracking through most of them to try to find things. And that can severely disrupt the pacing. The nooks and crannies that work well in combat just become one more place to look for a note or trading card, and the fact that you're looking for trading cards at all often feels too gamey for the otherwise sobering tone. So I think that last sentence makes a lot of sense, but everything before it is confusing. You may be wondering why I'm honing in on this, but this was part of the reason GameSpot gave the game an 8, because that's one of the cons listed, alongside the violence that sometimes goes unexplained, something that we'll have to actually look into and see. A lot of people were reacting to that part of the review, but Naughty Dog was really guilty of that with the entire Uncharted series, where Nathan Drake is portrayed as this hero. He's such a good guy. He's chasing down all these murderers and calling them names, but yet he shoots down hundreds and hundreds of people across all the games. So it's something that sort of Naughty Dog has hoped you forget within their own narratives. So I wonder if that's the avenue she's taking, and if so, I agree with her. I just found it a little funny, if I'm honest, that The Last of Us Part 2 got knocked by GameSpot because of collectibles. Anyway, this has been reviewing the reviews for The Last of Us Part 2. I will have the roundup from GameSpot linked in the description down below for you guys to check out. So if you want to go ahead and head to the individual reviews yourself and read them, go ahead and do so. Once again, linked down below. I hope you guys found this video informative and you walked away learning a bit about The Last of Us Part 2. Anyway, I'll talk with all of you soon. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Big thank you to all the patrons who continue to push the limits here on this channel. Appreciate each and every single one of you, and that Persona project is because of your continued support. I'll talk with you guys soon. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.